Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining tonight's event, marking the Kindertransport anniversary, memory, testimony, and safe routes, between the historic dates of the 21st of November 1938, when the UK Parliament had its first debate on the issue, and the 2nd of December 1938, which is the arrival of the first Kindertransport in the UK from Berlin, Germany, a moment to remember, honor, and learn from history. My name is Mia Hassanson-Gross, and I'm the Executive Director of René Cassin, a UK-based Jewish human rights organization that works to promote and protect universal rights in the UK, drawing on Jewish teachings, Jewish values, and Jewish experience. We work within the Jewish community in the UK, building support for human rights issues and values. And then we bring the community and its authority as a community of experts by experience, and the Jewish perspective on wider issues that resonate with Jewish experience. The modern human rights framework was developed in response to the horrors of the Holocaust. Our namesake, Monsieur René Cassin, co-drafted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, which was the first expression of a global commitment to protect human dignity, demand accountability, and act when others need protecting. We believe that as survivors of intolerance, discrimination, and persecution, we understand the need for empathy and solidarity, and the Jewish community has a unique authoritative voice in speaking out when other minorities or vulnerable groups in the UK face similar circumstances. Tonight's event is in partnership with Generation to Generation and the Association of Jewish Refugees. Generation to Generation, also known as G2G, is a Holocaust education registered charity which enables the descendants and close friends of Holocaust survivors to share the survivors' experiences before and during the Holocaust. G2G was set up in June 2016 and offers a rigorous and supportive mentoring program for its speakers. Last year, G2G reached close to 50,000 people in schools, universities, prisons, public and private organizations, religious and civic groups across the UK. For more information, please have a look at the G2G link shared in the chat. Tonight's event is an exploration of the Kindertransport journey from policy to personal story and how history informs our responsibility in shaping humane immigration policies today. To help us navigate this journey, I'm delighted to introduce our speakers for this evening. Dr. Amy Williams is a Kindertransport Scholar and in residence at the Association of Jewish Refugees. Amy will share with us her research into the Kindertransport lists, including interviews with Kindertransport children and their relatives, and how we can use these lists to challenge current policies. G2G speaker Tim Locke will speak about his mother Ruth and Uncle Raymond's experiences of fleeing persecution via the Kindertransport from Germany. And finally, I will say a few words connecting the legacy of the Kindertransport to today's urgent debate on safe routes for refugees and asylum seekers. Amy and Tim will both speak for about 15 minutes each. I'll try to be less than that, after which we'll open it up to questions from you, our audience. Please use the Q&A function at the bottom of the toolbar to write your questions. And just a final word before I pass on my virtual microphone to Amy. This event is being partially recorded. So Amy, please.
Oh, thank you so much for that lovely introduction. I'm just going to do the lovely technical part of trying to share my PowerPoint. Hold on a moment. Okay, brilliant. No, thank you so much for having me. It's wonderful to be here with you all. So yeah, Kindertransport safe routes. What were they? Well, when you go into the archive, these are the terms that you're looking for with regards to the Kindertransport. So in terms of how we think of the Kindertransport being a safe route, these are all the different terminologies we need to be thinking about when we're trying to access materials. So we often think of the Kindertransport, but we might want to think about the Frank Reich transport. Now, this is a particular destination, i.e. France. Holland transport speaks for itself and England transport speaks for itself. So there were versions of the Kindertransport that were very specific to a particular area. They talked about a specific journey to a specific host nation or a destination. The term Kindertransport or Kindertransports is something which is more broad and could speak for one journey or several different routes. The term Kindertransport itself actually is first used in 1934. This is a particular safe route going to New York. These were a group of really small group of children moving from Germany, sometimes via Britain, to New York, particularly to the Clara de Hirsch home, to be educated. They were going there for educational purposes. But this is the first use of the term Kindertransport before Reichspogromnacht. And there was already a safe route in terms of educational routes for these children. And this was facilitated by the Americans. Now, I found the Kindertransport lists last year, and I've continued to find more. But these sort of what I call overview lists were known. They're actually online as well. So you can see all the different types of safe routes that I was just talking about. You can see the transports, particularly these are from Austria. You can see how far they go. They go to England, Holland, France, Belgium, Sweden. You can see all the different destinations and when these transports take place. This list was also known. This is the overview of the Winton list. Again, a specific type of safe route from Prague to Britain, and you can see when those take place as well. It's quite serendipitous that we are speaking today. The 25th of November has a real significance for the Kindertransport because there were so many meetings on this day. So this is at the anniversary of really kicking off the Kindertransport. So the Council of German Jewry representatives from that particular organisation went to Holland, I think it's 87 years ago today, if my math is correct, to discuss with them about the refugee situation. They wanted to discuss the transportation of children through Holland to Britain, and they agreed with the Dutch on a number of children that were to stay in Holland initially and then later be moved on to Britain. You can see in this document the image of the Kindertransport, this safe route that we all know and are so familiar with, actually didn't look like that at the time. It was first envisioned that we would take in children already in Holland. So we would essentially be a second rescuer. But as these talks were happening on this day so many years ago, this is when the term Kindertransport and the use of these safe routes came to be was constantly changing. They were having these debates in Holland, and the Dutch is really interesting because the Dutch had already taken in a small amount of children already at this point, just over 100. We had already taken in the Basque children in 1937, fleeing the Spanish Civil War, and we'd already taken in around 500 children through the Inter-Aid committee, so that there was some sort of safe route already developed before what we now know as our version of the Kindertransport. But in Holland, the children that had already been there and the children that continued to come were quarantined, and the Dutch were really quite anxious about sending these children on to us, because in Holland they knew where they were. They were in these camps or in these orphanages or homes, and the Dutch were really quite anxious about sending them to Britain to be sent, as the film is called, into the arms of strangers. They were quite concerned, and you can see all this in the documentation. Now, the safe routes were so incredibly important because we have stories like this child here, Fritz. Fritz was interned in Dachau after Reichspogromnacht. You can actually see what block he was held in. So this is another document from the Arolsen archive. Again, you can see these two brothers. They were also interned, also in Dachau. So it wasn't just that these safe routes need to be opened for educational purposes, as we'd already seen. It was a desperate need to get these children out of the camps, these older boys from 15, 16, 17-year-olds who had actually been interned. All these boys end up on a Kindertransport, and some of the younger Kinder remember these boys with shaven heads on the trains. So it was so important for these safe routes to go forward. We've also got Gestapo files, so we can think of the people behind these safe routes, the community, the Jewish communities, the committees, the parents, the governments, the chaperones, the doctors, all the women that don't get mentioned, the secretaries, the foster families, all those people are behind safe routes. But we also need to consider the Nazis' involvement, which is really quite tricky in a way, because the Jewish community had to inform where these children were going and when. Eichmann, for example, was central. He knew exactly what the routes were. He even tried to speed up some of these transports. So every child that left on a Kindertransport had to inform the Gestapo. The Gestapo would have had a file on them. Now, a lot of these files don't exist anymore, but some of them do. And here's an example for you. These are files of a little girl that goes to Belgium, and the Gestapo say that she's not a political threat, that she's free to go. I will come back to the story towards the end of the talk about what happens to this particular little girl. This gives you an example about what the parents were informed. So this is essentially a document of instructions for the parents so that they knew what was happening to their children during these safe routes. And there are some really so heart-rending parts in these instructions. It says the older boys and girls should take the hand of the younger ones as they enter the train and onto the platform and onto the ferries and things like that. It's a really rather incredible document, which it's not just how the children should behave or things like that, which of course this is about, but it reassures the parents as well. And so they know what will happen during this route. I don't know if anybody of you have seen, these are the ferry tickets and the train tickets that were used on these safe routes. So there was so much documentation. It was still a bureaucratic process. All this had to be paid prior to. It wasn't free to journey on these safe routes. We often hear of the £50, which was often paid into Barclays Bank, which is interesting. This is the documentation that they travelled on during this safe route. These are the buildings that ensured that the safe route would continue. So the Kindertransport list that I'll show you shortly was sent to this creamy looking building, which was essentially the Dutch Kindertransport Committee building. They then forwarded the lists onto the reddish looking building, which was the border guards. Anybody that left on a train that was coming to England, these two buildings are essential for your story because they are the ones that gave permission for the children to enter the borders. So that's there. And again, it's not just about the trains. These safe routes also included the boats. So these are the ferries. It was the Vienna, Prague and Amsterdam that the children travelled on. Sadly, I only have the ferry information from the end of June until the outbreak of war. But for example, we can talk about one of the transports that arrived in Holland on the 30th of June. They travelled on the Amsterdam with over 200 passengers, 400 tons of cargo, and it arrived into Harwich on the 1st of July at 6:05 in the morning. So you can get an idea, what time these safe routes were happening. This is the cabin. The Kinder wouldn't have travelled in quite this luxury up here. This is first class. These are the sorts of cabins that they were travelling on. And this is the ship Vienna. So this is one of the ferries that they travelled on. Now, this is the Kindertransport list itself. This is the safe route. This is the sort of image that we have of it. And it's not only the safe route, but it's the intended destination as well. So some of them say London, others say Cardiff. So you can see where the intended safe route will finish. We also have the lists of the chaperones as well, which I'll come back to in a moment. This gives us a really detailed perspective of the safe route. It tells us how many children are travelling. It tells us what time on the border it will cross. It even tells us on this occasion, there are two transports on the same safe route. They will enter the border at Holland on the same day, and they will both board the ferry at the same time. So, for example, this transport will arrive at 4:51 on the afternoon with 115 children, and they will arrive on the border at Oldenzaal. Another transport will arrive at 6:18 on the afternoon with 56 children at Zverin, and they will converge with one another at the Hook of Holland at 9:37. So you can see all these children, you can imagine these two trains arriving and all the children arriving together at the Hook of Holland to journey on further. This is Lord Dub's list. Alf is just down here. So you can see, obviously he has deep connections with yourselves. Again, you can see his list and where that particular transport was going across the border. There was actually an extra transport, extra train put on for Prague. This one's really interesting because all the Prague transports normally cross the border around the same time, which is 4:15. So the safe route from a Prague perspective, each transport travelled at the same time. Obviously, they travelled at different times, but they were on exactly the same sort of train route, whereas the German and Austrian ones were at different times. Not running out of time, but desperately want to share more. These are how safe routes are so important that they continue upon arrival. So this green document belongs to a little boy who came over by a ship. He's called Peter Lutz Jonas, and he was from Germany. And you can see in this document, this is a World Jewish Relief file, all the different places he was living. So his caregivers, that he had pocket money, that he had to register, all these sort of like post-pastoral care that he was able to receive. This document on the other side is the brown document, is the registration cards in Belgium, in Brussels. So again, registration continued for these kinder. They continually had to register. So the safe route had come to an end, their journey had come to an end, but their experiences hadn't. So again, thinking about how you have to continue to advocate for the children after they've arrived. Obviously, children didn't just journey on the safe routes, it was also the chaperones. This is a chaperone list, and this is a register after their arrival in Britain. It's a myth that all the chaperones had to return, otherwise the Kindertransports would come to a halt. That's a myth. A lot stayed. A lot of the Austrian ones, maybe 50 to 100, actually stayed. And in this registration document, they're down as the conductor of children. So again, without these chaperones, these safe routes, they were so integral. They were showing the border guards the lists, and they were just so integral. And they are so unknown heroes in many ways, and they make several trips as well. Now, this is more of the, I suppose, sadder part of the talk. This is when safe routes are no longer safe. So these two little boys, Ludwig and Hans, are on 3 separate Winton transports. They're listed, they're not crossed off. They have Kindertransport numbers, they have 3 in fact, and they never make it. With their mother, they were deported to Terezin and then the Warsaw Ghetto. This is what happens when safe routes are no longer safe. They were on the Kindertransport list, but they never made it. Again, thinking about how, thinking about the ongoing obligation of safety, this is when the children are interned as enemy aliens and sent to Canada as internees or as enemy aliens. These are their deportation lists, essentially. And this is the real tragic part of the story, when there are no safe routes at all. So after 1942, all Kindertransports come to a halt, and the term Kindertransport becomes a word for the deportation of children. So Eichmann, Kartlischka, other people use this term to refer to the deportation of children, which you can see down here. And we even have Kindertransport lists in terms of deportation as well. But when it comes to the post-war period, these safe routes continue. We've learned from the pre-war period, and we continue to rescue children, particularly those who have survived the concentration camps, and we have these post-war lists. And the result of all this work is that I got the real opportunity to go with Sue to visit the National Archive in The Hague to see her mother's list. So this is the result of a safe route, the next generation. And obviously that links into Tim's talk next. So thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Amy, and thank you for bringing to life lists. You've really humanized the list for us. Tim, looking forward to hearing you.
Good evening, everyone. Hello. I'm just going to share my screen first. So let's see if this works. So should have a nice image of Generation to Generation, which is the charity I do quite a lot of talks for, based on the story of my mother and uncle, Ruth and Raymond Neumeier. Here they are as children in Germany back in the...
Tim, it's not shared. I think I might share it if you're happy with that.
Yes, by all means, let's just start there.
Okay.
Was it showing?
Screen, should choose screen 2?
Yes, should be screen 2, yes. Oh, hang on, I just need to hit the word share. I'm terribly sorry about that. It's a good word. There we are. Is that okay? You got it now? Great.
Yes.
There we are. So this is these are my people, that Raymond and Ruth Neumeier. So Raymond on the left, aged about 13, and my mum, which is about approaching 15, and that they are in southern Germany, and they live in the town of Dachau, which was actually a lovely place to live in before the Nazis rather messed things up. And they were both born in the 1920s, brought up not as Jews, but actually as Lutheran Christians, because their mother was a Lutheran Christian, their father was Jewish. So that's them. And here they are having tea in their garden in Dachau, around 1929. At the back, you can see my parents, Hans and Vera Neumeier, grandparents I never met. And they both perished in the Holocaust. And at the front on the right, my uncle Raymond, and aged about 5, he's called Raimund. I'll explain later. He has changed his name. And on the left, my mother Ruth, with a teddy bear, which comes into play at the end of my talk as well. So watch out for that teddy bear. But there they were having a relaxed time in the town of Dachau, in this lovely old house they lived in, until things went horribly wrong under the Nazis. The reason they were persecuted was because of the Nuremberg laws, and I think they were quite oblivious to the risks that they faced with that. And this is the summary of them: that if you had more than three or four Jewish grandparents, you weren't Jewish by Nazi law. So that actually trapped not just my grandfather, who was obviously Jewish, but my uncle and mother, who had 3 Jewish grandparents, and my grandmother, married to a Jew, became a Mischling, but fully Jewish as well. So that put me in great danger. And on the 8th of November 1938, the Nazis in Dachau prepared this list of the 13 or so Jews living in Dachau, and they'll also be thrown out of their house that night and say, you must leave by dawn tomorrow or else go to prison. So that they had to do, and becoming homeless and losing all their possessions overnight. And the next day, my mum and her family found themselves in Munich. and what happened the next day was this massive November pogrom, which the Nazis called Kristallnacht. This was really the signal, I think, that the family really had to get out of Germany. For a long time, that they did that. They hadn't done anything. I think they could have gone earlier. I think now they realised they were in great danger, as Jewish businesses were smashed up, the synagogue was burnt down in Munich. Somehow, my mum's family were out of danger, sheltering someone's attic, probably in a suburb somewhere in Munich. So, what the way out for them was this connection they had to England through somebody called Beatrice Paish, who was married to Frank Paish, living in London, and they'd met the Paishes, or met Beatrice 25 years earlier at a place called Hellerau, which is they're doing as students. And my grandparents wrote to the Paishes saying, please, would you take the children? We don't have any money for the £50 guarantee, which is more than £3,000 per child in today's money. And the Paishes wrote back saying, we'd love to. We're very, very happy to do that. This is absolutely wonderful news for them. And here's what my grandfather, Hans, said in his very good English. It's being read out by a friend.
We accept the noble-hearted offer of your brother and your sister-in-law with joyful relief. The contents of your last letter came to us as a light sent by God through the hopeless darkness of the night around us. All we can do is to stretch out our hands to you, dear Mrs. Paish, as well as to your brother and his wife, to thank you and to pray to God that he may reward you for all your kindness.
So this extended family, the Paishes, Sterlings, Eckards, their various cousins, two of them put up the £50, and one of them was Lady Simon Withenshaw, who is a well-known Manchester benefactor, and she's born as Sheena Potter, and the other person was someone called Edith Siman. So these brilliant people really came to the rescue. And the date was set for the Kindertransport. I think there's a lot of queuing up and getting passports and a lot of bureaucratic hassle. But the 9th of May, 1939 was the day my mother and uncle left Germany and never saw their parents again, starting from Munich. Thanks to Amy's hard work, I've managed to find out quite a lot about the journey and who else is on the train. And I can also work out the route of the train. It went from Munich, Mannheim, Frankfurt, Cologne to Emmerich. And I've looked up quite a lot about the children who are on that train. And there obviously was a lot of terror and people crying and weeping through the night as this train went on its slow way through Germany. And people being separated from their parents. And the SS guards were around and they didn't really know what's going to happen. Here's what my mother says.
The night we were leaving, we were sort of feeling very mixed, of course, and sad in a way. In the middle of the night, it's always worse. And our parents were allowed to come to the station. We were woken up once by some SS officials who wanted to look at our papers. And we thought, well, probably something awful is going to happen, but nothing happened.
But those are the actual suitcases they took. I managed to find them in my mother's house. Still had identifiable luggage tags on them, and that's the actual ferry ticket they took. Actually, first class on the ferry over from Hook of Holland. Now, the children on that train, one of the kinder described as an adult, the feeling of relief when they got to the Dutch border. There was this horrible terror for the most of the journey, and when they got to the Dutch border, the SS got off, and these nice Dutch ladies with cocoa and white bread for all the children got on. And it's this white bread which seems to become legendary. They'd never had white bread before. Certainly my mother hadn't. And so Holland was a thoroughly good thing. And there apparently the children all just screamed with pleasure, and they shouted out, "We are free." And they got over to the Hook of Holland and overnight ferry to Harwich on the SS Amsterdam. And another one of the kinder described that at Harwich, there were men throwing sweets into the train. These obviously people very aware of regular convoys of child refugees from Nazi Germany. And when they got to London, there was Frank and Beatrice Page waiting for them in the arrivals hall, and took them in their nice car through the centre of London, pointing out the sights to the family in Weybridge, where there was a huge meal and a very warm welcome with some very nice people. So they arrived on the 11th of May 1939. A new language, new people, new family. Everything was so much better. My mother said it's the first time she ever enjoyed being in a school. Apparently when they arrived, she was wearing a dirndl and he was wearing lederhosen, so looking very like little Bavarian children, but they got on tremendously well. So for a bit, life was so much better. They left the worries of Nazi Germany behind. And my mother also says there's kind of relief because there's tension between her parents without really saying what it is. Just a nice little detail here on the right. There's her diary from 11th of May 1939, very hard to read, but it says Ankunft in Weybridge. So 3 very important words there. And then on the Friday the 12th, on this most important time of her life, she writes her first ever English word. It's cornflakes. Always makes me smile. So they were staying with branch of the family called the Eckards for a bit. Oscar and Doris, and Oscar, they got on like a house on fire. They loved each other and always did through the whole life. And he wrote to his mother, "The Neumeier children are very nice indeed, and I think we shall all be happy together. They're tiny for their ages, with sweet faces and charming manners."
Mrs. Pace was very nice. She came and sat on my bed and she said, "Oh, it won't be long and your parents will be all right and we shall look after you." And yes, we were comforted, and we were at the time when lots of new impressions come into your life. Everything very positive.
So letters came twice a week in these days after the Kindertransport and before the war started. The mother, Vera, my grandmother, is trying endlessly this long distance mothering process and making sure everything's all right and try to make sure reassuring and everything's normal, and we'll try to get to England. The plan is that they're going to come, and everyone thought they were going to come. They even got permission to come. My grandmother's to do domestic work and Hans to go to a blind institution in Leatherhead, but it never came to anything. And here she is in that little letter in the middle. You can see her, she's doodled a little map of Britain, but nothing happens. They obviously can't get the permissions or the money or something. She writes a year later to a friend in Dachau that if I'd known I'd never see my children again, I would never have let them go. But I'm very glad she did. I found all these letters in the trunk in my mother's house after we cleared it out, and they're absolutely fascinating. But they're all bundled up in very tightly in string, and she obviously didn't want anyone else to read them until later. But I unravelled them, and it's opened up a whole lot of things. That summer, 1939, they went on holiday, the Page family and the extended family, to St David's Head in Pembrokeshire. And one day, the farmer where they were staying said that war has broken out between Britain and Germany. It was the 3rd of September, 1939, which would have been my grandmother's 46th birthday. I think then they probably realised they're not going to see each other for quite a long time, if ever. My mother got moved to Cambridge to stay with another branch of the family, and she really hit it off there. She was lucky. She got involved with a very supportive refugee community in Cambridge, which is quite significant actually. And a lot of them were Christians, Jewish Christians, people like these 2 refugees here on the left, Laura and Erica Weiss. My mother's in the middle there. They came absolute lifelong buddies, almost like sisters. And they were refugees from Vienna, and they never found their mother again after that. And my mother also works in the Shirley War nurseries after she trained in domestic work as part of the war efforts in the war in Cambridge. Her great friend Jane, who's one of the adopted family, Jane Donaldson, said that our family is rather boring until Ruth arrived, and when she came, it's like the lights have turned on. And she said Ruth and Jane wrote that Ruth was 15, round-faced, rosy cheeks with 2 long plaits. It must have been tough for her to be parted from her parents and friends. Well, I'm ashamed to say I don't remember considering this, perhaps because she was always so cheerful. So she kept this incredible brave face. But meanwhile, my Uncle Raymond, he had a pretty tough time. He was sent away to a farm, to work on a farm, a part of a scheme called British Boys for British Farms, although the other boys, they're all foreigners apart from one. He didn't like the life in the country, and he tried to escape, and later on he ended up in Birmingham in a bicycle factory. But all the time he was desperately trying to get his education on course and studying at night like mad. Sometime in 1942, they got this telegram, the Red Cross letter sent off on 9th of July from Munich, and their mother, Vera, is saying, going on journey, but cheerful and happy. She wasn't very cheerful, wasn't very happy. She had been deported, and that was the end. We think almost certainly she went to the gas chambers in Dachau. Meanwhile, Raymond, it went on his 18th birthday, was desperate to sign up to the British Army and work as an interpreter. So he did that. And you can see his passbook on the left. It says someone has written exempt from registration while serving in the forces. And he said that's the first time he ever felt accepted by the UK. So he had to change his name to an English name. Instead of Raymond Neumeier, he was Raymond Newland. So I always knew him as Raymond. He's carrying on doing lots of studying, and he was posted to Belgium in the end of 1944 and went on to Germany in early 45. So he saw a lot of what's going on there. I've retrieved over 100 of his letters written when he was working in the army. He was writing to my mother, over 100 of them. And I guess a lot of the sort of passion he has over there. You can see those extracts there. I won't read them out, but and he's also extremely fond of his older sister, and they really kept an eye out for each other. They're really close buddies. Meanwhile, my mother got the terrible news on her 22nd birthday about her mother, and she wrote it in her diary, which she kept by her bed in London. And this 1945 diary says that my mother was deported to a part of Poland in 1942 from where there is little news. I think I shall stop now before I drop my pen. That's what she says. She knows there's no chance anymore. And she gets the news a few weeks later that their father, Hans Neumann, had died at Theresienstadt in 1944. So all hope really had gone. But they did have huge luck with their English new family. And I must say, not all Kindertransport children were so lucky. A lot of them had a very, very tough time. But the Paishes, Eckards, Sterlings, they became aunts, uncles, and cousins, a new family. And some of them are still in touch with us. And very late on, Aunt B, as we knew her, and Uncle Frank Paish, said to her that taking in Ruth and Raymond was the best thing we ever did in our lives. And I'm going to finish now. This is the finale, which is the Imperial War Museum's new Holocaust galleries. I'm very glad to say that it has a case with lots of items from our family, but they're all related to her Kindertransport journey and some of the things she took over there. But Pride of Place in the middle there, you see this bear, which I mentioned right at the beginning in 1929. There's the photograph up on the right there. And that bear actually came on the Kindertransport with my mother, and it survived. And one final comment about the bear is the first time I talked in the public about my mother and uncle's story, it was to a large audience on Holocaust Memorial Day in Lewis, nearly 12 years ago. I'd introduced the bear in the story, just like I have done today, saying there they are having tea. And I said, there's a happy ending for the bear. He came on the Kindertransport. I said at the end of the talk, he survived, and making his public debut, here he is. And I brought the bear out from bag under the table, held it aloft. And to my absolute amazement, there was a huge wave of applause and cheers from this absolutely packed crowd in this big room, which took me by surprise. And I realized that moment was a wonderfully potent symbol of survival, that bear was. So that's all from me for now. There's lots more on my blog about the Kindertransport particularly, but lots of other stories as well. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Tim. That was phenomenal. And you know, in this one story of your Uncle Raymond and Mother Ruth, it's a story of tragedy but hope as well.
Yes.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Yes. Thank you.
Can everyone see my screen? So I am going to take Amy's lists and Tim's story of his mother and uncle and the 20,000 children that came here to own safe routes and bring them to contemporary debate. I also want to mention very briefly that today is also another significant day. It's the 80th anniversary of the Nuremberg trials. It's the Nuremberg moment where the modern human rights framework emerged. And Amy very briefly mentioned that some of the children that came here in the Kindertransport were translators during the trials. So again, it brings the Kindertransport experience and today's significant date together. So the testimonies of the Kindertransport through the lists and Tim's story are an expression of both rescue and trauma. Stories of separation, of loss, of adaptation in an unfamiliar land, but also a story of safety and hope. These experiences highlight the importance of creating safe routes for refugees, not just as transport, but as pathways to security, to stability, and to dignity. So what are safe routes? Just so we understand not so much the legal, but the definition. So safe routes are secure, legal and accessible pathways that allow refugees to reach protection without having to resort to dangerous and irregular journeys. Often also known as resettlement and family reunion schemes, and ideally refined refugee visas aligned with international law. Those routes enable refugees to claim asylum safely, in line with the Refugee Convention, 1951 Refugee Convention, without the risk of dangerous and irregular journeys like small boat crossings. They embody global responsibility and human rights, ensuring refugees' dignity and security. Providing safe routes decreases reliance on risky travel and causes of harm and exploitation experienced by refugees. Safe routes offer access to housing, healthcare, education, and employment without fear of deportation. The UK played a leading role, for example, in drafting the 1951 Refugee Convention, which was introduced in the shadow of the horrors of the Holocaust and exists to provide refugees with safety and stability, not to impose temporary protection and further insecurity. As a signatory, the UK must uphold its international obligations, and we'll refer to that a bit further on, showing the moral leadership that it took in 1951 that's desperately needed also today. So the refugee conventions and safe routes are meant to ensure we have this, not this. Both are reality of today's refugee and asylum seekers in the UK. So linking the past and the present, the Kindertransport that saved over 10,000 children was thanks to individuals, charities, and communities working together. Not so much an official policy by the UK government. It was just that they didn't put any obstacles to private and organizational initiatives. Today, limited safe routes mean many still face dangerous journeys, exploitation, and trauma. The UK's response to the Hungarian refugee crisis in 1956 was another example of a formal safe route, a formal scheme that admitted 2,500 refugees through speedy entry and with housing placement program. Modern refugee protection policies are restricted. In the last few years, the UK has had only a handful of official safe route schemes, or resettlement schemes, known as the Ukraine at Home, the UK Family Scheme, Homes for Ukraine Sponsorship Scheme, and Ukraine Permission Extension Scheme, the Syrian Vulnerable People Resettlement Scheme. We've got a scheme for people that collaborated or supported British forces in Afghanistan, and for survivors of persecution in Sudan and to some extent in Hong Kong. Most of these schemes were limited, either in time or amounts of people that were able to come into the UK. And then last week, we got the news, the unfavorable headlines, where Home Secretary Shamama Mahmood was proposing new asylum reforms to UK policy. Just to give you a bit of headlines, I'm sure everyone saw literally the headlines last week, and it's been part of discussion throughout the week. The new proposals include refugee status would become temporary, subject to review every 2.5 years. Introduction of an earned settlement model. So there's no automatic settlement after 5 years, which exists today, both to refugees and people who have come here in other ways. An introduction, those arriving irregularly, i.e. in small boats, may have no path to permanent settlement for up to 30 years based on benefits claimed. So if they claimed benefits, then they would have less chances. If they didn't claim benefits, they would have more chances. And support like housing and benefits could become discretionary, not automatic. Today, a refugee in the UK receives £49 per week, and that is for food, heating, transport, communications, mobile phone, per individual. And these reforms obviously put individuals at risk. So real people living real lives in real risk. They leave people in prolonged limbo. They risk leaving people in prolonged limbo, reducing integration, increasing vulnerability, and heightening exploitation. Temporary status with frequent reviews can re-traumatize, and a lot of the refugees that come here, whether it's women fleeing, victims of trafficking coming from countries like Nigeria, or people fleeing political and other forms of persecution from Eritrea, women fleeing femicide from Tigray. This is, and we know, we've heard it from refugees, we've heard it for people who are currently in the asylum process in the UK, the risk of re-traumatizing these individuals, and how it undermines their sense of dignity and stability after going through what is really a dangerous and frightening journey, is one of the risks. And it also has an impact of survivors of modern day slavery. So those who have been trafficked to the UK and are reliant on an immigration system fall into a system that actually doesn't provide them both the support they need as asylum seekers, but also it doesn't provide them the support as victims of slavery, trafficking, and exploitation. So think about it. If the government's new refugee policy that was announced last week had been in place after 1945, or even during before 1945, when the Kindertransport was happening, how many of us and members of our community would still be thriving here today? Because whether we came, Kindertransport or in 1945, 1956, there's also Jewish refugees that came from Egypt and North Africa. They all benefited from a slightly warmer attitudes of welcoming, but also practical support in accessing language lessons for those who didn't come from, Egypt. They spoke English, but in other countries they didn't. Housing, healthcare, employment. This is something that we really have to grapple with today. And I think it's that resonance, and it's that history of ours in face of today's policies and suggestions that I think should propel us to become advocates for compassion and dignity, let alone fairness and justice. So at René Cassin, together with our sector partners, it's about now urging policymakers to reconsider policies, to reconsider if it becomes an issue or comes through the process of secondary legislation, not to punish those fleeing persecution, not to punish those who come here in irregular ways, just because we can't offer them and don't offer them safe and dignified ways to reach the UK. So now that all three of us have done our presentations, and I'll shut my screen, this is the time for questions from you, from the audience, which I can see some have been written already in the Q&A. And Tim and Amy, if you're happy, I'll moderate, or I'll read out the questions and signpost them. So I'll start with Tony, who has a question for the speaker. Does anyone know if the Paddington story was inspired by the Kinder, wearing labels and carrying little suitcases? So that's question number one, which is a brilliant question, Tony. And I'll give you both a chance. Amy and Tim.
No, it was very much inspired by the Kindertransport. Michael Bond, the author, saw the children arriving, and based his character on that. It's wonderful that it says we're talking about care and compassion, and that's what is written onto Paddington's label. It's not a number like the Kinder. It's care and compassion from that, from his family to hopefully somebody that potentially finds him, as we know somebody finds him. He's sent out with love and compassion, and for somebody to receive that, and that's what's on his label. Whereas the Kinder were sent over with numbers. The lists are numbers. They don't have an identity in that sense. It's a number. But obviously the foster families, and again Tim can speak more to this than me, obviously some foster families deeply connected with the personalities behind that number, whereas some didn't take the time to really, understand the trauma that they'd already experienced.
Thank you. Tim, I think it's quite remarkable that your mother's bear.
Yes.
And the fact that like Paddington. I
know, yes. I didn't realise. I loved Paddington books when I was a child. I still love them, actually. They're brilliant books. And I didn't realise that it didn't click until I saw the Paddington film, actually. They came out. And that's what it is. I got it. Yes. But never thought about it. It's totally obvious in retrospect. Except, of course, it would have been Liverpool Street rather than Paddington Station. But you can't have a bear called Liverpool Street. And there's another thing, as Mr. Gruber in the stories, I think, is also based on a refugee, the old antiques dealer. It's a very friendly antiques dealer Paddington makes friends with. So I do think that's nice. Can I just bring another children's story into play? Because my mother's was passionately fond of Hansel and Gretel, the story, and there's an opera by a composer called Engelbert Humperdinck, which she absolutely loved, and we played a bit of it at her funeral. And she used to play at their house in Dachau. They had children's plays with all the neighbours there, and children dressed up beautifully. And my grandmother orchestrated everything and did them singing and everything else like that. And one of the plays they did was Hansel and Gretel. And it was during one of these plays that the Gestapo burst into their house and took everyone's names, and that kind of everyone's childhood just ended like that. And then if you move on to 30 odd years, mid-60s, when I was a kid, we had my mother organised little plays in our house with the neighbours sitting on the thing. And lo and behold, we did Hansel and Gretel. And I think I played the part of a toadstool before I got stage fright. There, about 4. And it just occurred to me that the story of Hansel and Gretel, I can see why it's so poignant, because it's 2 little children being sent out into this wilderness and meeting an evil figure who tries to put them into an oven, and they escape. And because everything's turned around, and they get their parents back again at the end. So I think that made a lot of difference to her.
Thank you. Amy, there are 2 questions which I think you can just answer directly in the chat about where could people access the Winston lists and the Kindertransport lists. So if you don't mind sharing that. Yeah. So Gary and Karen, Amy will share that on the chat so you can have access to the list. A question from Chris. Does anyone know how many of the Kinders stayed in the UK and which countries the other Kinder left the UK for? I guess, Amy, that's a question for you.
Great question. I can quickly share with you this document that gives you an idea. This is where obviously all the children are coming from. There were even children coming from Italy, which nobody really talks about. But in terms of where they fled to, sorry to quickly go through this, a lot of them did remain here. However, obviously those that were interned were relocated to these other countries, did remain there in Canada and so on. So there were 10,000 children that came to Britain, around 3,000 that went to Switzerland, under 1,000 that went to Holland, around 900, just over 900 to Belgium. I think it's 600 that went to Sweden. So you can see that our country took in the most, but it's really interesting. There's this report from July 1939, and you can already see children departing from the UK. So where are they going? US, Australia, New Zealand, Uruguay. Where are they hoping to go to? Shanghai, Palestine, well, British Mandate Palestine, Brazil, India. And this is to be reunited with family members, not always parents. But there were, for example, quite a few Kinder that ended up in Bolivia, would you believe? There were... So these, like, as we've talked about safe routes, we have these are further safe routes. These are further journeys that children are taking to be reunited or to, seek shelter elsewhere. The Kindertransport was obviously a temporary measure. They were never meant to stay in Britain. They were always meant to move on. That's what the £50 was paid for. It was a sort of to further immigrate sort of thing. Obviously, when that didn't happen, it was used in other ways. But it's really interesting. We can also think about untypical safe routes. So there was a Kindertransport to Ethiopia from Vienna. There was also Kindertransports from Croatia via Turkey and Hungary to British Mandate Palestine as well. So there are, and we have those lists as well. So it's a real complicated process. And I think that's what we're going to be doing up to the 90th anniversary, really trying to knuckle down those numbers, like who was the Kindertransportee, how many were there, and how many, safe routes were there? Where did they go? Which countries took them in? While a lot of this is known, seeing it all collectively together isn't. And these more untypical journeys need to come into the frame as well.
Thank you. I think there's a question for me, which I will answer very briefly, that it's not very, policies coming out from this government are not very encouraging when it comes to refugees. So what could we do? I think from now on, and it's going to take time until these policies come into place, either through secondary legislation or directives from the Home Office, it's just nag your MP, write to your MP, put pressure. There are increasing numbers of Labour MPs that oppose these policies, and I think it's just about creating that pressure. Both René Cassin and Hayes Jacor work in partnership on this, and we will, have created and will continue to create both updated briefings, so you can argue your points, and template letters that you can send your MPs. So maybe this is a great plug-in. If you're not signed up to our newsletter, please do, because that's where you'll get updates and suggested calls to action. I'm conscious of time, so Amy and Tim, maybe you got a couple of minutes. We've got a few more questions coming in. From Hillary, the Kindertransport original right to disembark in Harwich stated that when the trouble is over, the Kinder were to go back home. Do you know when this changed? What about how the Kinder eventually got the right to be naturalized?
Yeah, you can follow those debates. If you go onto our Hansard, and then if you go all the way back to the 30s and then into the 40s, you can follow those debates like you could today. It was debated in Parliament, and in the committee files as well. There were debates around can we take these children in the sense of, can we adopt them? There was a whole discussion around that. That was more into the war period. There were discussions around their education and things like that, because obviously they weren't going anywhere. They were stuck here. We can think of the Attenborough girls who, with the Attenborough family, they were always meant to go to America. That got stopped because obviously the war was declared. A lot of these discussions take place after internment. So if you go into the Hansard, you'll see the debates there roughly from like 40 onwards, or 1940 onwards. You'll see those debates, but they follow all the way through. You won't find it under Kindertransport. You have to be a bit clever with how you look for things. But and in these it's called The Great Adventure. There is a little bit about that in that, what you've asked for in there, which was a report from 1945, I think that report came out. It's called, as I said, The Great Adventure. You can see a little bit of what the committee was dealing with at that point as well.
Tim, is there anything you want to add?
I've got my mother's naturalisation certificate, which I'm very, very proud of. I think it was 1947. She got it in 1947, 48.
Wow.
And I used it for getting my own German passport a few years ago. But both my brothers got it as well. And it was a lovely moment in the German embassy when they said they actually said it's an honour for Germany to give you back the citizenship that your family should never have lost. So that felt pretty good, and it felt pretty good going through the airport in Germany the first time with my passport. And a nice green light came on as I went through the Citizens of EU exit.
It's a bit more complicated now with their new border gates, but
Oh, yeah.
Tim, I think this is maybe a question for you. It's a generic question, but I wonder if you could maybe start with your mom's story. It's a question by Alan. What efforts were made by parents to ensure their children continued their Jewish education and faith? Because they weren't necessarily all housed with Jewish families, for example.
Mm-hmm. Well, my mother and uncle weren't Jewish by religion, but so that their mother was very keen that Raymond would be confirmed. And so it's one of the first things. Are you going to get confirmed? When's it going to happen? So, and he does get confirmed sometime in 1939. My mother had already gone through that process. So the Jewish thing wasn't really relevant in their case, although they had Jewish friends and so on and contacts. But I think religion was a big part of my mother's and uncle's life. I wonder if she slightly lost it later on. After she found her parents had perished. I don't know. It's quite hard to say. But it certainly permeates all the letters between her and Raymond during the war.
Amy, thank you, Tim. Amy, have you found any evidence or records to that on that?
On what, sorry?
On the issue of continuing Jewish life by the Kindertransport after arriving.
It's really interesting. There are, and depending on what country you're in as well, with regards to the list and the case files. So in the case files in the Netherlands, for example, you see them checking up on the children, like which home they're in, because a lot of them were in these like sort of homes. And you can see like there's not always an indication of like them keeping up their religious education. Here you've got letters from various rabbis and local committees advocating, or foster families themselves advocating for the fact that these children are in really rural areas and are nowhere near a synagogue. So they get, for example, those that are in Coventry, which obviously now is not that far from Birmingham, it's down the road. It was a bit of a distance back then. So they get a rabbi to come and, you know, have Shabbat with these children, and some of these children end up going to Jewish homes in neighboring areas. It was quite difficult for these children that were in rural communities. A lot of them had to go into the cities, be bussed in or something like that. But a lot of them were not always checked up on either. And it was again different. Not all the children, as Tim has said, were practicing Jews either. Or practicing their Jewish faith, sort of thing. So it really is such a complex story. And while some refugee committees did a very good job with tracking their children, not everybody did, and particularly when they were evacuated as well, which further dislocated them. So
Thank you. I'm conscious of time. There's one question, last question, and apologies to everyone else who's written, and it's great to see traffic now. But Helen has asked, why are there few records for some children? There are hardly any for my mother, Peppy God. I wonder if this is a reflection of a less successful placement. Do we know anything about that?
yeah, I mean, like just like family records, Tim is so lucky that his mom and his uncle kept so much stuff. Like some of the kinder, their records get lost for themselves, like themselves losing them, or they move and the things happen. But with regards to the main files, the World Jewish Relief files, which essentially register the children and then track them, that was it's changed names several times. So that was the organization that essentially brought them over. After the war, these files were placed in a garage and then were waterlogged, and information was lost, destroyed, not on purpose at all, but things happened. During the war itself, records were lost and things were, particularly when the bombings were happening and things like that. And there was anxieties around, you know, would we be invaded? So some things were purposely destroyed. Others were accidentally destroyed after the war. There would have been files in your local areas, like your local committees. But again, after the war, when these disintegrated, not everybody decided to archive. Birmingham Archive has an archive about its local kinder. And Cambridge does as well, and a few other areas, but not everybody does. Again, this is like a hindsight thing. We think, oh, how desperate it would be. But even the Kindertransport lists themselves, we would have had copies of them. Where are they? Some of the lists that are the boat lists do survive. They are in the National Archives, but you can't access them. I found them in America, which are our files in our archives, but you can't access them here. So some files aren't accessible for another 20, 30 years. We can't, they're not opened yet. Some of them are not catalogued under Kindertransport. Some of them, as I said, have been destroyed and things like that. It really is, as I'm sure Tim can attest to, like it is really difficult to find files, but when you do, it's amazing. But there's still this sense of discovery. It will be going on for many more years because there's just there is stuff out there. And it, you know, while I'm saying things were destroyed, things are there, but it is difficult to find.
Tim?
Yeah, can I say thank you to Amy for all that incredible work she's done at Yad Vashem and finding all these lists that we thought had disappeared forever. And I found one page of my mother's list, and we've got all the rest of it. That's fantastic. I mean, yeah, one goes on looking for clues, and that's kind of driven me on with this story as well. I never quite knew my mother's emotions about things, and I found out a little bit more through Raymond, but it's I think she kept a lot of things sealed up, and I don't blame her at all. It must have been unbelievably tough, and she did really well to bring up her family after all she'd been through, and as did so many other people.
And can I say one more thing? We need people like Tim, because Tim's dedication and hard work to uncovering his family story, delving so deep, but also then sharing that knowledge with us. I can't tell you how, read the blog, you know, you will find out so much. And it just shows you like how two stories complicate the Kindertransport so much. And then obviously Tim's personal reflection on those two family members is incredible. Like, if anybody has any family members, talk to them and get all their memories, but also we want to hear how that impacts the next generation. As researchers, talking with Tim is invaluable. It is so important. You learn so much. So I really do say, if you've got stories, please share.
Yes, and I must say, thanks for mentioning the blog. I mean, I started writing the blog in 2014. It's just a way of sorting it out in my own head. I couldn't really believe this had really happened to my mother. She didn't really sort of tell me that much about what she felt, and it's kind of brought so much into the fore. And people have read it, and they sent over incredible coincidences about a woman who sat next to my grandmother on the deportation to Auschwitz. Her great nephew sort of contacted me from America, and just out of the blue. So I've had just so many amazing sort of links which had turned up, and I found more and more. And then I realised, I don't know about this, but I found out quite a lot now, which I didn't realise when my mother was alive. I didn't really feel able to. So I recommend people write a blog about your family story. It just kind of opens things up, and you can do it in any order. You can edit it and go back to it and put more pictures in and so on.
So there you have it, a challenge set by Tim to write a blog, and by Amy, go out there, share your story. You thanked each other, but I'm going to thank you both. I'm going to thank you, Amy, for really bringing the list to life, and the research that you're doing, and what you're uncovering, and that story that you're telling. And Tim, for being a voice for your mother and for the 10,000 Kindertransport. I think it's such an important story to tell, and with that, the remarkable work that generation to generation does for the second and third generation of the stories that couldn't be told but must be told and are told. And I think it's really important. And thank you to our participants who joined us this evening to mark the Kindertransport, to learn from our personal history, from our peoplehood's history, but also how our nation, the UK, can provide safe food, can respond in compassion and in a fair way. And so that the reality for the refugees of today, whether it's fleeing persecution or war, is a dignified one. Please join René Cassin, support our work, join our newsletter, so you can get information about both the actions that we take, but also briefings. We try to keep our supporters up to date. Watch other events on YouTube. We've had Amy speak at previous events. We've marked Kindertransport in different ways. That's all available on our website through our YouTube. Yeah, and just, you're now here as a friend, so we look forward to seeing you again. Thank you both again, Amy and Tim, and good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.